The only reason why Kevin Durant didn't come to the New York Knicks is because the Knicks didn't give him the contract that he wanted. The Knicks didn't even offer him a contract. That's the only reason why Kevin Durant didn't come to the New York Knicks, because everybody and their mother knew that Kevin Durant wanted to play in New York and for the Knicks, not for the Brooklyn Nets. He went to the Brooklyn Nets because Kyrie Irving was there, and
they were essentially a package deal.
And the Nets gave him what he wanted. He wanted Jordan there. Jordan is there. He wanted his $150, $160 million or whatever he got. He got his money. The Knicks didn't offer him that because of his Achilles. And the Knicks didn't believe that he was going to be 100% again for the rest of his career. The Knicks might be biting up their thoughts on this when it comes down to it in the offseason when he becomes healthy. And he looks really, really good when I see him shooting at practice. But does that mean that Kevin Durant is going to be able to do that in a professional basketball game? So I don't know. But James Dolan, he has a little bit to blame on what we've seen with Spike Lee and Charles Oakley. Spike Lee should not be going in and out of a place where he thinks he has the authority to do that. Now, he is a superstar director. He's a face for the New York Knicks organization and the franchise because he's been there since day one, really, since the 70s. He's been sitting down there where, exactly where he's been sitting since day one. I understand that Spike Lee is one of the biggest Knicks fans in all of the world.
But who says he didn't take that door more often and then nobody realized it? And who said it was that problematic for everyone else there anyway?
And how do you know it wasn't a problematic? How do you know that James Dolan hasn't spoken to Spike Lee or Spike Lee's publicist telling him not to do it? And he's been doing it ever since. We don't know this, and I have a feeling that he has been doing it under the whim. And I think he deserves to be kicked out if he's doing something that James Dolan told him not to do.
That's fair. I also think, though, to an extent, unless there was an issue with maybe a disabled person, maybe he got in the way or tripped him up or something like that, maybe he was running in and knocked a disabled person over from behind and couldn't get up, knocked out unconscious, whatever. Unless there was an issue like that, I don't see really the difference of what door you go in Madison Square Garden. That seems kind of ridiculous.
But that's not the argument. The argument is if James Dolan and the New York Knicks organization is setting rules, I don't care who you are. You could be the Pope. Okay, you have to obey by them. And if Spike Lee is not obeying by them, he's going to be kicked out. You and me would be kicked out. Anybody in the press. Heck, even the players on the other teams that are not doing what the owner is telling them to do, he's going to kick them out. Charles Oakley was a big part of the New York Knicks in the 90s. Why did Charles Oakley get kicked out? Because Charles Oakley was taking a shot at James Dolan when he was sitting down right behind him, telling him, why am I not involved with this organization? I've been a part of this organization in their winning years. And he was upset that the Knicks never reach out to him like they do at Larry Johnson, who wasn't a real Knick, or the Allen Houston, who's a assistant GM. He wasn't a real Knick. Charles Oakley, and you're going to say, well, Charles Oakley was from the Bulls. Charles Oakley was a Knick. Charles Oakley was the heart of the New York Knicks organization with Patrick Ewing. He was a big part of that organization. Him, Anthony Mason, and we talk about Patrick Ewing. These were big pieces of that organization in the 90s, and that was when the Knicks were good. When was the last time we could say the Knicks were good? I mean, I've been a Knick fan my whole life. I'm 37 years old. I'm going to be 38 years old. I've been a Knicks fan my whole life. If you look at the Knicks right now and what I remember the Knicks in the 90s, they're far from what they were. Far from what they were. In the late 80s, early 90s, this team was one of the teams to beat. It was them, Chicago, and Houston were the teams to beat in the Eastern and Western Conference. And you'll see the Lakers. The Lakers at the end.
The Lakers made one finals, I think, in 91, but
yes,
that was it after that.
At the beginning of the 90s, in the middle of the 90s, the Lakers were not a team to beat. They really weren't. For the 5 or 6 years, the Lakers were not a good team.
Yeah, I think it was, Houston, the Supersonics, and the Jazz, maybe, were the best teams in the West.
And Portland.
And Portland.
Yes.
Right.
And then you look at the Eastern Conference, it was the Knicks, Orlando, Chicago,
the Hornets had
Cleveland.
a couple good years,
Cleveland. Cleveland was a good team at that time, too. They always had good games against the Chicago Bulls in the playoffs with Brad Daugherty and some of the players that they had. When I look at the New York Knicks, you cannot blame James Dolan for all of these situations that have happened. Now, is James Dolan a good owner? He's not. The players don't relate to the owner. And you look at good ownership like the Yankees. the players relate to the Steinbrenners. The Steinbrenners have a rule. No facial hair. Do you see any players grow facial hair during the regular season? They do not. Garrett Cole, who wore a beard and a mustache all season last year. All season, he grew a beard and a mustache. He has not one piece of hair on his face now that he's a New York Yankee. The Yankees set a law, and you obey by them. If James Dolan is going to set a law for Charles Oakley or set a law for Spike, even Spike Lee, you obey by him. And if you don't obey by him, you're not going to be in his Madison Square Garden. And it is his Madison Square Garden. He owns it. He is in charge, and he is the CEO and the owner of the world's most famous arena.
It just seems like a silly thing, though. Yeah, which door you go in?
Listen, there's a law, there's a rule. Let me ask you a question. You go to a police station, and the police station, the guy, you walk up to the police guy, and he says to you, license and registration, or something like that, or he wants to know who you are. And he tells you, okay, sit down. If you stand, you think it's going to piss him off? If he tells you to sit down,
right.
Is it going to piss him off?
Okay, yeah.
It's going to piss him
Absolutely.
off. Because he's telling you to sit. He doesn't want you standing there. He doesn't want you riding up his ass. He's telling you to sit. You sit.
Okay.
That's the law.
Right.
You know, he sets the law. Now, James Dolan is the police officer. He's the head of police. He's the lieutenant or whatever, the general of Madison Square Garden. If he's telling you that he does not want you going through that door, you don't go through that door. And that's what I'm going to say. You could put Jeff on. You know how to put him on. You could put Jeff on. But I look at this and I argue about this all the time. Plug him in, man. What are you, blind? You know how to play. How many times do I have to teach you? Geez, Speedy, you're the producer of the show. Welcome to Down to the Wire. What's going on, Jeff? What's going on, Jeff?
Man, what an elaborate ruse you just went through to build a studio in your basement just so you could get Speedy down there.
That's not why. But what would you like to speak about?
Man, I don't know how you're not blaming James Dolan for this, dude. Everything he does is like, okay, if he wants people to go through a different entrance, that's fine. But don't you think he should have given him a heads up? I agree with you. You want to make rules and you want people to follow the rules. That's fine. But you should at least tell people what the rules are going to be before you just change it on them without giving them any notice. And something Spike Lee has been doing for 28 years all of a sudden changes. Spike Lee didn't do anything different last night than he did any other night for the last 30 years.
Well, how do you know? Now, I understand what you're saying, and you might be right, Jeff. But if James Dolan has rules.
Spike Lee was on First Take today saying he's been using that entrance for 28 years.
Okay, and maybe he has told Spike Lee more than once not to do it. And Spike Lee does whatever he wants because Spike Lee thinks he's in charge. He's the boss. He owns the New York Knicks in that organization. I'm not saying that Spike Lee was wrong, okay? I'm not saying that. I'm saying that there's more than meets the eye. I know a lot of people want to point their finger at James Dolan, saying that James Dolan is a bad guy, and James Dolan, nobody wants to play for him because he doesn't know what the hell he's doing. And that possibly is true. But if he sets a rule not to go through that door, that only, or whatever.
I think it was media, security, and
disabled
people.
Disabled people.
I think that was the three.
If disabled people and media are the only people allowed to go through, Spike Lee should not be going through the door, even though it's Spike Lee. And I understand what you're saying, Jeff. Am I saying that James Dolan is 100% not at fault? No, I'm not saying that. But I would say he's partial at fault, but I can say this about Spike Lee, too. Spike Lee could say whatever he wants, and everybody's going to take Spike Lee's side because everybody hates James Dolan. And that's a fact. Nobody likes James Dolan.
I don't think people are taking Spike Lee's side just because people hate James Dolan. I mean, James Dolan has a history of this kind of behavior, though. Like, he banned that fan from Madison Square Garden for yelling, "Sell the team." Like, that's not how you treat people. Like, they're allowed to say what they want to say when they do that. He had that dude banned because of that. I mean, that's weak.
Yeah, and I don't think James Dolan's the only owner that's ever done that. I know it's the only owner.
Redskins fans just did that for Dan Snyder.
But you talk about James Dolan because he runs and he owns the New York Knicks. It's a New York organization, and the press wants to spit it out and spew it out to all over the the media rallies so they can say, you know what, James Dolan is a fool, he's an idiot, he's dumbass, and we need to get rid of him as an owner. I understand. Go ahead.
Right, but listen, I'm all for what you're saying, right? Have rules and have that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But there's one person in this whole scenario that has a horrible history, and that's Dolan has the bad history. He's the one banning people from the Garden. He's the one getting into the altercation with Charles Oakley. He's the one that's caused most of the trouble through this whole thing. So, like, of course people are going to say it's James Dolan's fault because, dude, he has the history.
And again, I understand what you're saying, but you have to look at what James Dolan, if he sets a rule, you got to obey by him. And I'm not saying, again, I don't know what the rules are in Madison Square Garden because I don't really go to Madison Square Garden because I'm not a Ranger fan. And I'm not going to go to a Knicks game because the Knicks games are usually sold out and it's corporate America. And I'm not going to go to a Knicks game. I used to go to Knicks games at least 3-4 times a year to watch a Knicks game. Now I'd rather watch it on TV because, first of all, the Knicks stink. Second of all, I'm not going to waste. They stink. RJ Barrett's the only good player on that team right now. And you look at the team and the organization and the way it's run. Why would I put money in the pockets of James Dolan or the organization when the product is not good right now? Now, hopefully the product gets better. And it doesn't really help that James Dolan, he's the first thing you talk about with the New York Knicks. It's not about the fact that they beat the Houston Rockets yesterday the way they did and RJ Barrett scored 27 points. No, they're talking about the Knicks kicking out Spike Lee because he walked through the wrong door. I mean, that's the New York Knicks. That's the organization. That's the way the press wants to make the Knicks as a laughing stock and a joke. And that's why a lot of players don't want to come to New York. It's not really because of the ownership. I think it has a lot to do with the ownership, but it also has to do with the press because the press brings things out that shouldn't be brought out to the public. This story should have never been brought out to the public. James Dolan should have kicked out Spike Lee and then reached out to Spike Lee's publicist or something or whoever you have to get a hold of and sit down and talk to Spike Lee and give him rules. You can't go through this door. I've said this numerous amount of times. You've been doing it for year in and year out, and I got sick of it, so I kicked you out of the game. That's what it should have been.
One thing after another with James Dolan.
Yeah, it is.
Charles Oakley.
It is.
And then it's kicking out the fans. And then now it's Spike Lee. They totally mishandled the Kristaps Porzingis thing, right? They can't figure out. I don't know. Maybe this will be a good GM hire. I can't say that it is or it isn't right now. I'm not going to bash it. But they can't. They can't figure out GM. They can't figure out head coach. They just hired a head coach. They fired him 5 games into the season. How fast did they fire David Fizdale?
Yeah, it was
pretty fast.
Like 10 games.
Right, like I'm not bashing them by any means, but they do have a pattern of just everything James Dolan does.
Was he wrong? Was he wrong to fire David Fizdale? Look at the way the team's playing under Miller. Who the hell is Miller? I mean, I've never even heard of this guy.
I gotta be honest with you, man. If I sign a dude up, what did they sign him for? 4 years, 5 years, whatever they did. I'm gonna give him a little bit of time. You can't just fire a dude right away. Like their culture is so bad, but he's like, it's either now or it's never. And I don't think David Fizdale got a fair shake with the team that he was given.
Well, think about it this way. Look at the record when David Fizdale got fired and look at the record now. I mean, David Fizdale, he was running the team. I think the Knicks fired him 20 games or 22 games into the season. Since Miller took over, they have a better record, a better winning percentage, and they've played better basketball under him. So what does that tell you about David Fizdale? Maybe he's not a good head coach. Maybe that's what tells you.
Yeah, that might be true too, but I also think that you got to give guys a little time. They just hired the dude.